Hello everyone, I'm Gareth Mitchell. I'm a technology broadcaster and science communication lecturer. Welcome to this video podcast all about disorder in a world where some are saying the machines are becoming as smart as us. Whatever that means. I mean, what does that mean when we hear people saying that? We'll find out a little bit more as we go along, I'm sure. In business, we all live with reward, risk, payoff. Well, think of AI. Its potential in productivity and creativity is mind-blowing, but equally mind-blowing are the risks. Arguably, the most significant thing that humanity has created is developing fast, with little sign of regulation or any pause to take stock and think through the implications of all this stuff. This is an era of disorder and uncertainty. Unsettling for some, but a time of great opportunity for the brave and the innovative. Stay with us as we survey the risks and work out what the rewards could look like over the coming decades if we get it right. If you get it right, whatever your role in business. In the studio, I have two people with me, but first, Dr. Nejra van Zalk, who's a senior lecturer in psychology and human factors at the Dyson School of Design Engineering at Imperial College London, and Nejra directs the Design Psychology Lab. So you're very into this whole interaction between us and the machines, human behaviour, AIs, and all that kind of stuff. This is such a profound time when half the time we don't even know if the thing we're reading on screen has come from a chatbot or another human being. So how do you enter this discussion? What's on your mind as we go into this discussion about disorder? Everything seems quite disordered.
It's a fascinating time to study human behavior, but I'm very, very interested in how young people, children, and vulnerable individuals engage with technology. And we're seeing some empirical evidence that they tend to ascribe agency to these systems. They tend to trust them more readily. And so my worry for the future, if there's a lack of education and understanding about how these systems work, that we may place too much trust in them, growing up with, generations of young people growing up with them and using them as oracles of truth.
All right, Nejra, thank you very much indeed for that. Now, also joining us is Professor Pierre Pinson, Chair of DataCentric Design Engineering, also at the Dyson School. And Pierre is a Chief Scientist at the advanced analytics and AI company Halfspace. So, Pierre, welcome along.
Thanks.
And so you're the forecaster amongst us. I just wonder if you're forecasting great innovation in data. This thing that so often has been thought of as this rather dry collection of spreadsheets or Excels. Now it's a significant resource for many, if not all, businesses. So you're seeing great innovation, are you?
Yes, so I like your expression, opportunity for the brave. I think we've been discussing digitalization and data for the last 20 years or more, right? And maybe, I'm fairly sure time has come. We have the fertile ground for disruption, and we're really looking forward for what's going to come next. And based on what said Nejra, we have to be smart and to be aware of limitation, but it's definitely time for great innovation.
All right, so we've already had a few risks and a few potential rewards. Do the machines have too much agency argument, or if they do we even know, kind of thing. But also, hey, great business opportunities, great opportunities with data as a resource if we get it right. So let's just go into some of the technologies that we might be talking about here, because it's very easy just to talk all the time about AI. Is that the only character in the room at the moment? Just give us a sense, Pierre, of the kind of technologies that we should be talking about in a discussion like this.
Yeah, I think today we use the term AI as a buzzword, or as a word that's supposed to summarize a lot of many things, right? So typically, if you look at technology development in that space, there's been algorithms around, us interacting with algorithms for, let's say, more than 15 years casually, when we watch Netflix, when we interact with any kind of computers, video games. So that's what we should talk about. Actually, it's algorithms more generally, those that we would, let's say, identify to some kind of intelligence that would just behave by itself. We call it an AI, but actually these algorithms are everywhere. So the debate, the discussion should be more broadly about all these algorithms.
And how about you, Nejra? How do you see it? Especially, you're so interested in that interaction between humans and technology. So is it all about AI for you?
I mean, like Pierre says, I think a lot of the technology that we engage with on a day-to-day basis is sort of algorithm or AI powered, right? So you've got your chatbots, you've got your humble laptops humble, right? And your smartphones, all of that technology has, is powered by clever models that will show you what you want to see and direct you where you need to go and all of that. And I think that's, for me, that's where the interesting interaction happens. It's inevitable that we start thinking of these things as really clever, because indeed they are, and we have much to be grateful for with these technologies.
And to return to your worry at the beginning about agency then, so there's our agency as users in all this, but you're talking about agency of algorithms, or users like us thinking just because it turns up on a screen and looks vaguely intelligent, therefore this is a real thing and we should trust it. So just unpack, I suppose the dangers are obvious, but just go a bit further into that.
I mean, we're seeing examples of this right now, and there's a lot of fear mongering around this, which is, it's difficult to know what to sort of place emphasis on, but we are certainly seeing, let's say in the educational sector, worries about young people engaging with information from, let's say, the ChatGPT, system, as if it were written in stone and the truth, where academics have double-checked outputs that come from that and have verified that actually a lot of it is made up and it's not true. And so who holds the truth? I mean, this is I think has been a profound question in our civilization, right? Who holds the truth, and what is the truth? How do we get to the truth? But with increasing amount of content that's generated by, in systems that look real, that appear real, that it may not be, that look like real people speaking, but they may not be. How do we verify what the source is? How do we know where things come from? That is, I think, my concern as a consumer of these products and systems.
Yeah, and what about from your point of view is thinking about data design, for instance, or the design of data systems? I wondered, just before we get into that, Pierre, what does that even mean? Like, putting it bluntly, what do you do?
Yeah, thanks very much. No, so there's a very good point building on what Nejra says, and then you will hear what I do. Whatever system we're talking about here, being an AI, an algorithm, they actually learn or do something based on experience, something that has already happened, and they learn from it, right? So typically, this is summarized in data. So we collect data out there, and then these algorithms are trying to learn based on this data on the fly, based on past data. And then they want to give us the impression, that it's extremely reactive and it's adapted to our situation, but it's using past experience that's been recorded. So that means, one, that there's a lot of value in data that we may collect, that we may own, that we may share. And second, that we need these kind of algorithms that squeeze the data and get the value out of it, right? After, for us as laymen or consumers, we don't really realize what's happening behind, but we have the data as the raw product, and we have these algorithms as the smart thing to use to get the value from the data. So that's what I work on at the Dyson School, and we look at it from the purely algorithmic point of view, from the data point of view, but also from the business point of view.
Right, and so let's pick up on the business point of view then. So what should businesses know about, for instance, data-centric design? Should they be hiring people who know about data-centric design?
I mean, obviously, based on what we were discussing, in the future, I think a lot of the very innovative, very disruptive business models will have a data-centric component. It's just obvious, right? It's important for them to realize that it has a lot of implications. You were talking about hiring. But maybe before hiring, it's realizing what is the strategy with data, right? We need a roadmap. Do we need to collect data already yesterday? Do we need to staff to have the right people to play with data? Do we need to hire some consultancies or do work with a university, for instance, to do this kind of work? And I think it's a lot about strategy also. We need to have a strategy when we engage into this data world. Otherwise, there's not really a lot of value out of that.
And then bringing in the behavioural aspects as well then. So in the business is full of individual human beings. I mean, for instance, from an HR point of view, should they be increasingly now thinking about algorithms as part of the workforce then, Nejra?
I think that will become the reality, right? What we're seeing right now is that legislation is sadly lagging behind, and it's not just in this particular issue. It's generally speaking when it comes to, online harms, if you will, or, our interaction with systems where we really don't know much of what's happening, especially with young people, like I mentioned before. I think we're going to have to come up with clever ways to consider these systems as part of a larger landscape where humans are included. The problem is that we haven't really had the discussion on a larger societal level of what are the unique human capabilities that are worth preserving and what contributes to human flourishing and what could we arguably leave to be automated and done because, arguably it's dull and nobody wants to do it, and or it can be done better through the use of algorithms.
Yeah, because I suppose in terms of that, in terms of what's dull, what might be more exciting, one argument that we often hear is that using these kinds of technologies is a way of freeing up people, staff in businesses, for instance, to do the more exciting stuff and leave the mundane stuff to the machine. So it should unlock creativity when we have humans and AIs working together. And are you optimistic about it? I saw a mild frown there, possibly. Is that?
No.
Am I being very idealistic there?
I think if you're a Star Trek fan, then you probably, right? So in Star Trek, that's the utopian vision, that human beings are left to be able to... That's right. We can pursue arts and culture and intellectual pursuits, whereas, boring stuff is done by robots and machines or whatever. And that sounds really lovely, except that, in my mind, it's not quite so straightforward. There was a really interesting article in the Times yesterday where the writer was juxtaposing Nolan, the robot, a delivery robot who was in San Francisco delivering food, and he had to wade through a large homeless community of people sleeping on the street, right? And there's something like 43,000 homeless people in California. So that's an interesting, juxtaposition where you say you have this system which clearly is meant to deliver something good and help out. On the other hand, we have all these people that, clearly the society has failed. So how do we square those two things and make sure that everyone's taken care of whilst also innovating in this space? I think that's the discussion I'd like to have.
Sure, which, Pierre, already brings us to the idea of employment, for instance. And again, the thing that many are aware of, that the machines are becoming pretty good at things that we might have never thought they would do. Or say even 5 years ago, we wouldn't have imagined that a system could do some of the paralegal work, for instance, in a legal firm. So this is more than just robots picking up widgets on production lines now, isn't it? It's moved on quite a bit.
Sure. I think so. So the legal stuff, as you mentioned, it's still an example also where we see the limitations in these lines of work where it's extremely specialized. It's very difficult for machines, for algorithms to actually replace human. We've had some examples in the past, for instance. One of the first thing we don't think of where an AI, a machine has taken over humans, it's weather forecasting. We got used to the idea, we see this weather forecast on TV, on the internet, and it's some of the biggest computers in the world with algorithms behind that are producing those, and they've actually replaced humans. In the old times or in certain communities today still, it's humans who predict the weather. But the thing, if you look at weathers versus the machines or algorithms do very well on average, but for atypical situations, humans still can say better what these extremes are about, what are going to be the impacts, how we should react to these extreme events. So it's a bit of the same here when you talk about the legal stuff or maybe high-risk line of work or very impactful line of work, is that for the very special cases, are we ready to trust a machine, an algorithm today? Maybe not.
Right, okay. That is the question. Are we ready then, Nejra? I mean, I'm assuming the answer is no, but that's going to become a more and more thorny question as the years go on, isn't it? I mean, this stuff is developing so quickly.
Yeah, and I think, educators, legislators, everyone really is lagging behind. We've seen for a while the digital divide between parents and children where, a lot of parents will feel, for example, that they have no idea what their kids are up to because they just aren't tech, into the tech themselves. And so as this development continues exponentially, I think we're going to see great generational divides where you have people like ourselves who've grown up in societies where, you understand the difference between, using your smartphone and leaving it behind, and you're not necessarily attached to it emotionally. And I think we're seeing that changed in younger generations. So I don't think we are ready. I don't think we're ready to teach skills with these things because the educators themselves aren't ready to understand what they do. And clearly, the legislation is very slow. If you speak to people who legislate, which I do because I get involved in these things, they want as much help as they can get because obviously, this is very, very unique stuff.
and it's happening so quickly, and certainly in terms of governance, the question is almost where do we start? And I do want to get into governance as we go into this discussion, but to kind of take us there, I wonder if, Pierre, we can talk about co-design, because I sometimes feel that's a word that we don't hear enough of, where I think we're still very siloed, and maybe even many businesses are quite siloed in terms of who does what, who the data scientists are, who the psychologists are, and they might sit at different desks in different spaces and so on. What does co-design look like for you as somebody who works as you both do, in a design skill?
Yes, so we have many colleagues who work with co-design when it comes to AI and humans, and I think they could talk about it better than me. But I think here, so for instance, you talk about silos, and it's a classical issue in many organizations, right? And data and digitalization is challenging that. But here the co-design is more specifically about the humans and the algorithms. If we want, Nejra mentioned, a good outcome, or if we want to make sure that the AI is assisting the humans and not taking over, we need to think of them together, right? How are the humans going to interact with the algorithms or the AI? What do they expect out of it? What would the AI expect of the humans in a way? So I think in the future, this co-design will become a natural element in business, in tech development, but also in society. Because if we have these parallel tracks of disruptions in AI, new algorithms that are going to take over our world in so many different ways, the humans will also have to think, okay, but we have to think of this together with the rest, right? So social outcomes, as you were mentioning, and new functionalities of robots. But there are so many questions out there that will require this co-design spirit.
Yeah, Pierre said a lot of interesting stuff in that answer, but one phrase that really came out to me here is what do the algorithms expect? Which is imbuing them with some agency, isn't it? Even to be thinking on that level.
Yeah, one of my PhD students, she's working on looking at how people perceive chatbot interaction. So, voice user interfaces. And it's really funny that it takes very little for humans to anthropomorphize these systems, for us to start thinking of them as real, and there are films made on this, and it's not made up, it's actually a real thing. I think it's one of the beauties of human nature that we can see sort of the human even in things that aren't there. But there's a danger with that, if it does invoke trust, if it does invoke, for example, if it stops you from actually engaging with other humans because you're so comfortable with just having those interactions safely at home, right? Because you're vulnerable to begin with. If you have social anxiety, which is my specialty, right? There, it's not a very good thing. But if it's just a tool that you use to help you do some shopping and predict the weather, then that's completely fine.
Yeah, which it shows where we've come to with NLP, with natural language models in this processing, that they can make you feel very at home with them in a conversation, as you suggested there, especially if you have social anxiety. These interactions are not only meaningful for you, but you find them very comforting, which raises questions about whether this should be flagged up then as some AI that's giving you this response. But maybe if you're a vulnerable person with social anxiety who enjoys and gets a lot out of these interactions, and if a big flag comes up or it's all highlighted in red saying, well, a machine's churning this out anyway, so watch it, how's that going to work with these people?
Well, we don't know, right? There's very little real empirical data from experimental observations that looks at how humans interact with systems. Most of the time, we have post hoc self-reports where people tell us, I enjoy doing this, or I spend this many hours engaging with the chatbot or whatever. The funny side of it is when we have to engage with systems that are clearly bad, that frustrates us. I mean, my bank chatbot being a great example of, seeking help and really coming across as very dumb, right? So we're very good at detecting when it's a stupid system, and we sort of forget, if the system is very clever, that it's not real.
Yeah.
So I think we have to design systems that are going to make it clear who it is that we're interacting with.
Yeah, and I wonder if that can then take us into data, because that is the raw resource that's feeding all these algorithms. And there is a very interesting quote from Sam Altman, who's the CEO of OpenAI, of course, that has created ChatGPT and GPT-4. And he was addressing an MIT gathering quite recently, as we record this podcast at the end of May, where he foresees the end of large AI because it's very expensive, it's very resource heavy. But a big thing that he said was that just getting hold of the data is becoming it's becoming very expensive, it's becoming very scarce because of data regulation and so on. And so he says with all these roadblocks, actually, this could be already the end of the era of big AI because of its raw resource data being so scarce and so expensive. Okay, so looking forward then, 10, 20-year horizon, what about the danger of some kind of emergent behaviour happening? Maybe it is already among the algorithms. So many of these AIs are out there now, many of them feeding data to the others. So are we already seeing, or will we see, some kind of emergent behaviour for better or for worse, Nejra?
I mean, it's difficult to say, right? Because the systems that we're talking about right now, we've used example of ChatGPT. They're not necessarily interconnected, but I think once they become, which Pierre hinted at before, and I think they will become interconnected, of course we will see certain behaviors, and I think we'll see responses from humans as we engage with these systems. But, it all very much sounds like science fiction at this stage. Of course, it's not really, because the future's already here, except that we haven't really quite decided, how far we will allow it to go. Humans aren't perfect either. I mean, a good example is a famous study that looked at judges who make decisions about sentencing. And if they do it before lunch, when they're hungry, they tend to give out harsh sentences. And if they do it after lunch, when they're nice and full, they tend to be more lenient, right? So humans are equally biased and problematic. So in a way, these systems, I think, will be a reflection of us, because the data that they will build on will come from us as a human race, collectively speaking. Sadly, also just a subset of us, because not all of the humans will be providing or have provided, indeed, the data that many of these systems are based on.
Yeah, I'm convinced there'll be care robots that just go upstairs, walk around a room, forget why they're there, and come back downstairs again, because they've learned to do that from us. From me, anyway. That's one of my predictions.
I mean, it's been said before in different contexts. So Andrew Ng, for instance, in Stanford, has already mentioned this for other reasons, that we should not look at big data anymore, we should look at small data. This statement is really true because, as I mentioned earlier during the podcast, all these machineries, these algorithms, this AI, they need data experience to learn from, right? But as we deploy, as there's lots of business models, etc., somehow the business view would be, how do we get the maximum value at minimum cost out of this system? And as you said, it costs a lot to collect data. So let's try to get the most we can out of the data that already exists today, and then we'll see. And eventually, from a game theoretical point of view, we end up in a situation where not enough data is being generated, or it's so costly anyway to play with this data to get something out of it. So if we don't find some kind of business model that allow us to see the interest in investing in collecting new data, generating new data, this could be actually the end point.
Yeah,
right.
and to say nothing of the other problem, that an increasing amount of this data is frankly rubbish. I was going to use a less polite word, but I better hadn't. It's a video podcast. We don't know who's watching. But we're talking about all this hallucinogenic data, algorithms that are just churning out, frankly, a load of rubbish, which is then further churned out and repeated by other algorithms and feeds others. And this whole issue that, if you're trying to design, you're in a business trying to design good AI, and 90% of the information out of there is just a load of nonsense that's been churned out by other systems, we're in trouble, aren't we? So first Pierre and then Nejra.
So you're totally right. I will answer that from a technical point of view. At the interface between machine learning and business/engineering application, answering your question, we know one of the biggest challenge is to be able to sort the bad data from the valuable data in the future. Some people have been saying in the past, it's discoverability, the issue. Yeah? We need to find the right data feed. But as you say, today there's so much data out of there, it's the opposite. We need to sort this data out and just focus on the valuable data. There's already people today who are developing algorithm or approaches so as to do that. So we could make it a market, for instance. And if you feed my system with bad bad data, you're going to receive a fine, right? So you generate incentive for people not to do that. But at the same time, I mean, it's extremely costly too. So we have to find ways to do it in a very cheap manner, because otherwise it would add up even more to your problem,
Yeah,
right?
sure.
So there's lots of bad data. All this bad data is being churned, and now we have algorithm on top of that. They're trying to sort it out. So, but we know it's one of the biggest challenges. It's data overflow. We need to find a way to sort it out.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like an absolute nightmare to me, Nejra, but, you know, bad data, creating bad systems and therefore bad experiences for users.
Yeah, so garbage in, garbage out, the whole kind of, you know, the idea that the data that we see is a snapshot of humanity, which is full of biases and problems, right? And so you know, a lot of the decisions that are spewed out by these systems or whatever are affected by this. I think this is one of the big challenges. How do we create representative data? Actually, also, how do we reward people for their data? I'm really interested in this, although there are some concerns that, you know, if we are, let's say we pay people for all the information we can gather about them, will it change their behavior, right? So if you have a smart mattress at home that monitors your sleep patterns, for example, are you going to want to spend more time on your you know, mattress because you get paid more, right? Because you're on your bed. So this is where
I can
we
see
have
the incentive mechanisms could be all wrong there.
That's right. Yeah. So we have to think about the incentive mechanisms. That was my point.
Yeah, no, sure, absolutely. Or even the point about whether we should be selling our data anyway. You know, something data. I know. Well, I've got two data experts here, but let's just say that data is kind of information. I know it isn't. There's an important distinction between data and information, but we have to be careful. Very aware of who might be watching. But, you know, given that information, in other words, the output of human thought and intellectual endeavour, is incredibly beautiful and sacred and important. Even maybe that data that we generate on our mattress, this is human data. To be commoditizing it in any way surely shows that we're looking the wrong way, doesn't it?
Depends on what you use it for, right? Let's say that the reason why you're collecting all of this data around the home is because you're trying to track early stage dementia, right? And you're trying to understand if someone has fallen down or if they need help, or, you know, you're looking at their stress levels or whatever. Arguably, the outcome is a good one. But if you're doing it because you're a company and you're really just interested in getting hold of the data and then selling it on to kind of third parties, then yeah, I would say you're sort of commoditizing the human experience, and it's making a mockery out of everything. So I think, going back to my original point, what are the systems that, you know, where we should be thinking about when AI could be making such huge difference, and that will be important. Healthcare, for example, being one, right?
Yeah, and so what are the mechanisms? And I'm thinking here of, you know, business people who are watching this podcast, Pierre, thinking, where does that leave me? For instance, if you see quite legitimately a decent business case in putting out a product, say a mattress or some kind of consumer electronics that will harvest user data that the user themselves can leverage to make their own lives better and perhaps even make a bit of money. And yet there are some thorny issues for these businesses to think about. And I'm just thinking, where does that leave them in terms of innovating, for instance?
Yeah, so you're right. It is a very complex issue. We don't want to monetize all data, obviously, as Nejra was mentioning, but there are different mechanisms. I mean, as of today, for instance, you have a subscription model, like with Facebook or Amazon if you have Alexa at home, right? So in a way, you have a contract, like your data is being collected, but you get this service from me. There's some other models where, in a future where we focus on SDGs, for instance, if my data is used for the common good, right? So for a societally beautiful objective, and you can give back credit to me for having shared information, that might be an incentive that is more, let's say, correct or elegant than thinking about money. So this idea of giving credit for contribution to people when they share data might also be a very good idea. Some other people have said, you know, let's be even more down to earth and pragmatic. It's data for data, right? So I have data, it's useful for others, I'm ready to share, but it has to flow the other way. So I'm just citing a few. I think that there's endless possibilities for how we think of it, but that brings us back to regulation or how we actually design the game so that it works properly. Because if we make it the Wild West, many are going to profit of it, and they're going to have amazing ideas and make a lot of money or have a lot of success, but many people will be left behind. So here we have actually clearly an opportunity to say, okay, we're at the beginning of a new era. We should regulate or decide on what the rules of the game are, and then let's go. Let's play.
Exactly. And as we ease ourselves into thinking through the rules of the game, or how the rules of the game can be written and made good and effective, I suppose we need to think about some of the scenarios that we're seeing already and that we're very likely to see in the coming 10, 20 years. So, Nejra, what about this idea? You know, people who know what they're talking about reputedly saying these systems are getting as smart as we are. And you've already mentioned the issue that we may be in danger of almost imbuing these machines with too much agency. So that's already an issue. So are these technologies widening inequalities in society or narrowing inequalities? Who wants to take that?
I mean, it's speculative at this stage, right? I mean, if you look at what automation has done in, many an industry, depending on your point of view, you might say that it's actually widened the inequalities. Some people might say, well, actually, it's narrowed them because it's created other job opportunities in other sectors, etc. So I think there's probably balance to it.
But I'm also thinking about biased data sets, for instance. So we all know that many groups are underrepresented in society and therefore in data sets feeding the algorithms.
Yeah.
So I think one of the positive things, we had this HR example before, the judge example before. One thing that is very exciting is that when these were humans doing this, having these biases, we kind of accepted it. It's human nature, it happens, we should work on that, but, But when it's algorithm, we seem to be very harsh, we don't accept it, right? So maybe one of the hope there is that because when it's an AI, it's not acceptable that this AI is biased or is bringing additional inequalities, we're going to work on it. Well, when it was humans, we would just accept it as the status quo, and we cannot change people, that's just the way they are. So as we heard, I think there is some hope, but it's a lot of hard work to find the right way to implement that.
And we already know that people's lives are being ruined in some cases by algorithmic decisions. And we think about HR decisions, for instance, sifting through CVs at the selection process, in the legal system, prosecutions brought against people from minorities, again because of bias in the data that wasn't sniffed out before the deployment of these algorithms. So already, again, these aren't just like little mistakes, but ruining people's lives.
Yeah, but I think so. There's a matter of literacy also, and I don't know if you realize, but the UK has invented / further developed one of these systems that is a bit funny. It's the credit score. So the credit score is also something that's AI driven with data in the background, right? And as of today, some people know they can plug extra channels of information to the system that calculate the credit score. And so if you can boost your credit score, not because you're bringing some information that is amazing and hidden somewhere, just because you knew you could do it. But maybe many people who don't have this literacy, they don't realize they could just go on some website, say, okay, you need to attach this stream of data to my credit score calculation. So this brings inequalities also by design.
Your take, Nejra, if you have one, no need to.
I mean, I am concerned. I think this is a real concern to me. I'm also thinking, oftentimes when we think of bias, we're thinking about ethnicity or etc., gender, but I'm also thinking about vulnerability. So people like part of that is not really understanding what these systems do, maybe not having the mental capacity to understand what these systems do. How do we make that decision-making process transparent to people? Why should it be so that you can hack your way through a credit score? Really, it should be an unbiased system that helps you derive at a score that's going to help you get a mortgage. So, we have to have discussions about how do we make better systems and remove this bias. We won't be able to eliminate it, I don't think.
Sure. Okay, that's tough. But for one thing, I mean, do you agree with that proposition that kind of humans and machines in some ways are on a kind of even par or becoming equally so?
I mean, in many ways, I would say machines are way past humans, right? I think this idea that, it has to be a robot that looks humanoid, and that speaks to you. I mean, it doesn't have to be. If I perceive that a system is engaging with me, it's interacting with me, it's giving me meaningful answers, arguably, this is a very smart intelligence system. Whether or not it possesses emotional intelligence, for example, which is something we pride ourselves as a species to possess, that's another question altogether. It can feign emotional intelligence, right? And that's all that matters. It can pretend to like you. It can pretend to take care of you. That's how many people do in everyday life.
It's quite a human
right?
trait, isn't it?
That's right. It's part of our social skills. We may not always feel up to things, but we make ourselves do it. And if these, if the systems learn from us, they'll be able to pick that up. So, in my opinion, they are smarter than us, but there are inherently human characteristics which I think machines themselves won't be able to emulate in the same way.
What kinds?
Well, I think, a genuine interaction, genuine empathy, I think is going to be something that's rather difficult. Sympathy is easily feigned, but I think empathy, where we're talking about, can that system actually feel what I'm feeling?
Wow.
If I'm upset, does it have the same emotional response? Can it have that, right? That's a really interesting question. I don't think we're ever going to get there. I also think there's something about, artistry and culture and generating content that is uniquely human that I think we as humans enjoy. I went to a jazz club on Saturday, and I forgot to think of so many other things because the saxophone player was so amazing, and that was a situation in a room filled with other people where we were all sharing this fantastic experience. That's one that you can't quite emulate by sitting and chatting to a machine in your bedroom. So there are experiences that are uniquely human.
Yeah, and you mentioned there obviously the creativity aspect, the jazz gig, and I can imagine an AI-powered jazz gig could have some very weird time signatures, but it could go horribly wrong. But this whole point about empathy then, and you, to me actually rather reassuringly said that you doubt whether we will have machines that genuinely are empathic, that can put themselves in the shoes of another person.
Well, that's the worry, because they won't be, right? So the fact that they won't care, will they make bad decisions?
Exactly. But I'll tell you why I feel reassured by that I might find it rather troubling that a machine could understand what I'm feeling, because that could be used against me as well as for me, couldn't it? If it knows what I'm thinking, it can guess what my intentions are.
Well, this is the risk
scary.
of emotional tech now that I know the ICO have been flagging quite a bit, this idea that we have emotion recognition systems in place that are pretty good at predicting, basic stress responses, and this idea of mental privacy is being, encroached upon. So the notion that I am the only person who knows how I feel, and if I don't want to share that, that should be my prerogative, that's being increasingly questioned. So yeah, I think that's a concern.
Yeah, and that's part of what I was getting at, which I think takes us to some dark places. Another scenario that sometimes get trotted out is that, Pierre, the way that the machines will take over may not be in the way that has been predicted by much science fiction. They'll become embodied and then shoot us down with lasers or take us into space and knock off all the circuit boards and so on. But a rather more boring takeover, in which case they infiltrate our bureaucracy, essentially, probably without even meaning to do it. But
no, we choose to do it.
Yeah, bureaucratic systems, we let them, and everything grinds to a halt as a result and takes humanity with it. Some predictions say. You're the forecaster. What do you reckon?
Yeah, no, so it's very true. I think here any kind of unforeseen effect from AI will be extremely boring. As we deploy systems and we expect them to replace humans, we're going to expect eventually that systems interact with each other. So we're talking about HR is going to talk with another service, etc. And eventually we're going to want them to be able to improvise, right? Because we said that's a definition of intelligence, they have to improvise. And then we have all these interconnected systems that start improvising, right? And one thing that we humans did is to give control to the system. So that's part of the co-design aspects we mentioned before. How do we empower the system to do things for us without losing control? Because if we start letting them talk, improvise, etc., eventually that's what we were saying, is that we can end up completely losing control over something that just brings us I don't know where.
Yeah, but would that really happen? I mean, I suppose we always like to comfort ourselves that we can reach for the off switch, as if this stuff is as easy as switching off as a TV or the automated function in a driverless vehicle. But are the machines really going to become like human whisperers? You know, the machine equivalent of like horse whisperers in human society. You can make a horse just do some weird stuff through some psychology going on with the horse. Are the systems really going to become human whisperers, and we just won't notice, and they'll seduce us into giving them loads of control?
I think, I mean, we should be frank with ourselves. It's not in that sense. It's really because we're going to start trusting these systems, and we're not going to look at them continuously, right? Or they're going to go too fast for us. So, for instance, an example is materials discoveries. These days, people want to use AI to discover some new materials. We can do the same with drugs. We can do the same with viruses. We can do the same with many things that are dangerous, right? And maybe what is a bit tricky to think of is that this AI could do it so fast and so easily that it's not that, you know, can I plug out or not? It's just that we are not going to be able to monitor it in a way that we can react in a timely manner. So that's what I was meaning before. It's just at some point we will naturally lose control because these guys are faster and stronger than us. Right?
All right. So, but maybe regulation will stop that happening, which is kind of where I want to begin to wrap things up then. So, regulation, of course, is highly important. So we need some kind of governance. And I just think about the mess in social media, where we've seen what a regulatory failure looks like, you know, the Wild West, and it's even, I mean, the toxic, horrible nature of much social media shows what can happen when we don't have the regulation or where the regulation falls behind the innovation. And of course, another problem that we face in a lot of these discussions is these silos, for instance, even between academia and business. So, Nejra, how do you think that academia and business can work together, and perhaps work more together than might be the case at the moment?
I really welcome this. In my own work, for example, I would really benefit from access to data, from access to people who work with innovation. There is definitely a silo there where as academics we get to sit and be loud on the side and yell at the fact that lots of stuff is happening, but bad stuff is happening. And then of course business is trying to run a business. And I understand that there are different and sometimes competing interests, but actually not as often competing as you might think. I think oftentimes, our interests could align because surely businesses want happy people, happy customers to be, at the end of whatever it is that they're offering.
Yeah, so assuming there's a conflict, Pierre, is probably rather short-sighted, isn't it? I mean, of course, there is a bridge between business and academia, and after all, many of the students both of you teach end up in industry and running their own businesses. So, but there may still be those in business who'll say, oh, it's all very well, you've got all day in academia to think your high thoughts. What does this really mean for us, what you come up with?
So I think it's changing. I think there's a lot of, or there's increasing respect of businesses in certain fields. I don't think it's everywhere. So sure, it has to spread a bit more. And I think what businesses value is the broad experience of academic colleagues. So think of it, a lot of SMEs, a lot of startup companies or new companies in this space, they need to rely on a buddy, a partner to grow, to find the right business models. And typically academia is the right place to be. It's easy to talk with people in academia. It's easy to collaborate if you commit to it. So I think it's very helpful. But back to maybe to the larger businesses, I think it's really this breadth of experience, of expertise, of vision also that can be found in academia that's extremely valuable for them. So you can come and talk to a person like me, and then there's a person like Nejra that can pop in the discussion, and eventually we can really get to some points where it would have taken them years maybe to do it by themselves.
Is there a business case for employing social scientists, for instance, or designers, or people with a psychology background? It's another load on the payroll. So I wonder if there is a case. I'm not trying to get you both work, believe you me, but is there a case for that kind of skill set in a business?
I'm all for it. My personal experience, I've been working with energy applications. And so typically I've been designing data products or data-driven systems, data-rich systems, I don't know what you want to call them. And typically our issue afterwards was adoption, understanding of people for what this system were doing, or commitment. Like people say, okay, the system now has been delivered, I just use it, right? While our expectation would be it's something that should bring something extra, right? So that's where you see that engineers or people that focus on the tech mainly, they fall short. Something's missing. And I think today it's so important that we have people that are psychologists, social scientists, people into innovation management working with the tech developers.
All right. So a critical thinker like you on the payroll then, Nejra, you think?
I mean, yes. A good example is our design engineering students who are well versed in human-centered design, for example, and we send them out and they do internships, and every time I have chats with people in companies, they could not be happier about the input that they get from our students, which makes me very proud, and I think it's a very, very meaningful subject. So I think, insights into behavior, insights into what drives people, what motivates them, how do we design products to make sure that, we're thinking about their well-being. Of course, this makes complete sense from a business point of view.
What about with AI? And it's marching up the hill so quickly. In fact, it's already here. So, Nejra, what hope do we have, I suppose, of regulating this stuff? Even defining what a lot of these systems are is hard enough before we even work out how to regulate.
I mean, I'm concerned that regulation is just lagging very much slowly behind the everything else that's going on. And again, regulation requires talking to people across disciplines, agreeing together what constitutes a good society. If you take the online harms bill as an example, right, that bill, the idea behind it was to protect young people on the internet, because the internet is designed for adults, it's not designed for children. And so a lot of the functions online are, they require you to have self-control, to know what's happening. And if you're young and you have low impulse control, you're going to struggle with that, right? So, but that's a great example of how then, some subsections of society feel that that's encroaching on their freedom of speech, because, they want to be able to say what they want, and, you have the right to be offended or whatever. So I think this is a very, very tricky space, and I'm just worried that we're not having enough debates, discussions about what is really the outcome we're looking for here. What kind of society are we trying to build? And that's very difficult. It's people like Pierre and some of our colleagues at Dyson School of Design Engineering. The idea is that you're going to have to think about a number of different future scenarios, some of which will be very uncomfortable. But, everything is a compromise, and we have to agree. And I think there is no consensus at the moment.
Yeah, so not regulation for the sake of regulation, but thinking, Pierre, where we want to end up. But in a business case, supposing I'm running an SME and I'm thinking I'm going to use AI for some of my back office functions, I'm going to use other generative AI to produce content for my blog, I'm going to automate some of my processes with AI, but I might be thinking, well, if I do that, am I suddenly going to get closed down by a whole load of regulation that's going to say I've got to switch these systems off?
I don't think so. I think so. First of all, I think that's a very good point, that it's extremely complex and requires a lot of discussions. I think we can safely tag a few systems, a few algorithms, a few things that have been in our lives already, and that could be tagged as safe as of now, right? And then I think one thing we forget to say, and maybe that's one of the points also of us talking now, is that there are many people at universities, at Imperial College and other universities, that are really working on that, thinking about that for society, for businesses, for the connection between science and people and tech. And we need to rely on these people for animating this discussion and for guiding the regulation. I think the UK government should be open-minded to this kind of discussion. And it's the same at the EU level. We hear that the EU Parliament or people at the top of the EU institutions, they're actually keen on opening this debate so that we find the right way to do so. So, I mean, eventually, I think we'll go through, I'd say, a set of a description of different type of system, different type of data, different type of usage, different types of impacts, and we will get there. But as of today, we've not done this mapping. mapping. So we're really just navigating through the fog and just hoping, someone is going to come with a proposal solution.
Which is not where you want to be at a time like this.
Not really.
Not exactly. So I don't know if we can be positive or a bit less positive as we draw to a close here, because one of you is the forecaster, the other the critical thinker. So critical thinker Nejra, what positive futures do you hope or foresee that we could choose to create?
I'm hoping that we create a future where these systems help us with healthcare, education, creativity, so many different sort of human endeavors, and we can trust them, we can rely on them, we can use them as tools, but that we never feel like we lose our autonomy and our agency, our uniqueness as a species. That's where I'm hoping we end up eventually. And I hope that there are plenty of business solutions that can take us there.
And how about you, Pierre, as the forecaster in the room? So finish with a forecast, if you will.
Oh no, I don't think I'm able to forecast where it's going to go. No, I think so. I fully agree with what was just said. I think personally, I would make it a bit of a worry if we also get too scared. In terms of the promises and the risk with AI and algorithms, I think we could also shut down and miss on many of the opportunities. So, I mean, we've been through that through history, right? There's an industrial revolution quite some time ago, right? And we just have to look at the balance. What's in it for us? What are going to be the societal consequences, etc.? It's very difficult to know as you go through it in real time. But eventually we see there were always good and bad things in there, and we had to learn to compromise and learn to embrace it with society. So a worry I would have is that if we block ourselves, we're also going to miss out on many opportunities.
All right. So we have to be careful that we don't miss out, but make some good decisions along the way, is at least one of our conclusions. There we'll leave it. Thank you both very much indeed. That's Pierre Pinson and also Nejra von Zalk. Both of them are at the Dyson School for Design Engineering at Imperial College London. And there's more folks where this came from, plenty more resources from the Tech Foresight team. You can find out more on our website, imperialtechforesight.com. I'm Gareth Mitchell, saying thank you very much for watching. Take care and goodbye.